How's it going, everybody? We're back with another video. For this past week, we've been researching regenerative farming. So hopefully we can teach you a bit about it. We've just been researching, so we're not experts on this topic, but hopefully we can encourage you to do further research. Anyway, let's get into the video. So one of the main reasons we actually made this video or making this video is because regenerative farming or farming could be a possibility for something we'll do in the future. And a lot of people out there may be having the ideas of moving out to a rural area and becoming farmers or something like that. So that's one of the reasons we made this video. Yeah, and also during this time, a lot of people are also considering moving and doing these sort of things. Also, we didn't know about regenerative farming, but it's a really cool way of farming. And the reason we got into this specific way of farming is because a few days ago, last week, we saw a documentary, around an hour and a half film, that was made in 2018 by these people. And they basically just talked about how basically they started from scratch and they became farmers. But it's this really cool way of farming and how it's, all natural. And that's basically what we'll be talking about in the video. This photo you see on the screen is actually a photo of their farm. This is just the garden area, and it's a lot different from conventional farming. So that's why this is such an interesting topic. Anyway, let's move on and get started. So nowadays, with the modern farming techniques, there are a lot of problems to do with health and other reasons. So we've chosen to do regenerative farming as an alternative, and we're going to talk about that today. Yeah, like we did in the video 2 weeks ago when we had a discussion. Basically, before we started explaining to you what, in this case, regenerative farming is, we basically, since we're using this sort of as an alternative way of farming, we've got to explain the other ways of farming, the modern day, the most widely used one, and basically we'll explain why that's not good and why this way of farming is much better. We're going to have two different types of farming, the most commonly used, and first we're going to start with monocropping. So monocropping is probably the most popular way of farming in our new day and age. It is the industrial version of farming, and basically, it's called monocropping. It's usually just for one crop basically, and there's no biodiversity whatsoever, which gets important to what we're going to be talking about later. And monocropping is also, unless it's organic, got to be the food is farmed that you're going to see in your supermarkets for your fruits and vegetables and anything else that grows in the ground. And as you can see in the photo, they're using these tractors with these long things, basically spraying things. And the things they're spraying, as you can see, is pesticides. Now, most people know what pesticides are. What they're used for is basically to they spray the crops, and that way nothing goes near it. So no bugs and no insect that wants to eat it. So none of them eat it. The reason they do this because it's good just to save the most food, and they're not really taking in consideration the nutritional value and the health of the food. They just want to get the food as cheaply made as possible and sell out as quickly as possible. Yeah, so they use these chemical alternatives because when you're doing such a mass production farm, it's harder to. It takes away a lot more of the troubles, just driving past with a tractor and spraying these. But they use the biological alternatives that smaller farms are known for using, and those alternatives are much better for your health, which we'll talk about shortly. Now, so pesticides, first of all, they make the health of the soil really poor because you're spraying chemicals into the ground, and the soil becomes really bad and unhealthy, which means the fruit or vegetables or whatever's growing there basically its nutritional value is quite poor, and it doesn't have the greatest vitamins that it would if you grew it naturally. And there's also been cases of pesticides basically traveling through the soil and making its way to the rivers and lakes and basically polluting it and contaminating the water. Yeah, and killing lots of animals. We'll probably show you a clip now if you want to see that. So experts say why this way of farming isn't sustainable in the future and why we should be looking in other avenues is because basically what these pesticides do is they mess up the soil, like I already mentioned, but that basically messes with the longevity of the soil. It means eventually the land is just got to kill off all the plants, all the microorganisms in the ground, and you just won't be able to grow food there. So a lot of experts say that soon in some areas where they're monocropping very heavily, you just won't be able to farm there in the next decade. So it's definitely not sustainable, and no one's really taking that into consideration, and they just keep doing as they please. Also, there's no biodiversity, which means that, like we said, they're only growing one type of crop. And when there's biodiversity, they grow much more naturally, means they grow much faster, and they also grow much more
nutritious.
Yeah, they grow much more nutritious. Now, you might be thinking, well, isn't the whole point of mass production to get everything done as fast as possible? Well, the thing is, if you want to grow it with biodiversity, basically means you have a variety of plants and multiple crops, different type of crops growing there. It basically means that you have to grow it in a natural way, and that means you can't basically just have them all in the field where they basically use these machines also just to pick the berries or whatever's growing there, like I said. So it's really fast and efficient. They don't care that half the amount grows there or it takes half the speed, but basically it's the most efficient, cost effective wise.
Yeah, so you won't. So in a biodiverse farming technique, you won't actually see just like a thousand, say cabbages. You'll see like 20 of this, 50 of this. But that makes everything work together for wildlife. Say you have a farm, you attract lots of different wildlife, and as we'll talk about later with regenerative farming, it's a lovely system that's quite beautiful,
and it basically makes the food much more healthier. And that's a lot of reasons why people in the store, you might see like, oh, don't buy this, you want to buy organic. But the next topic is what we're going to move on to now. Basically, is organic, but it's not exactly what you may think. Anyway, let's get on to that. All right, so the next type of farming is organic farming. So now we're going to be talking about this. So as the name implies, organic, it sounds great, right? All natural, all, organic, no chemicals whatsoever, all perfect. But unfortunately, it's not as good as it seems. It's one of those things where big companies, try to use the label, to use for marketing basically, and there's a lot of loopholes around it. It's one of those cases like McDonald's or KFC, you may see them doing with all these things like free range, although free range is a real thing, but most, like especially bigger organizations, like they use terms like free range and
100%
natural,
this, 100% that,
to get away with things. But in reality, it's really easy just to meet the requirements and to do barely like the whatever's necessary, but to the very minimum,
Yeah, a great documentary expressing that and showing off that is Super Size Me 2. This guy, he basically goes into the farming industry, specifically chickens, and opens his own fast food restaurant.
So fried chicken.
Yeah. And he exposes how all these regulations and basically all these rules just to get all these labels like free range and stuff like and organic
are really easy to get away with.
Yeah, there's loopholes, and the way he showed it, there were still like very unhealthy chickens, and the end result was basically like any fast food joint, and it had all these labels that makes it sound so good.
But in reality, it's pretty much the same as a very bad quality chicken, because it is. But anyway, when we talk about organic farming, this is quite important because there's a lot of confusion with the names of this farming. Because organic, there's like different types of organic. There's organic like this or this photo, where they still do it the conventional way of farming, but basically they use all organic things. And there's another way, which is regenerative farming, which also has a lot of confusion. There's a lot of names. You can call it like all natural farms or regenerative organic farms, all these different things, because they might think organic, with super biodiverse, but this specific one we're talking about, and this is probably the one you see in the supermarket. If they say organic, this is most likely how it will be farmed, unless you buy it at some farmer's market where, they're all just local.
Yeah, this organic farming that we're talking about is for mass production and still the industrial version. So it's not as good as you may think.
So first we're just going to explain basically we're going to compare it to monocropping and say how they do everything differently, and we'll go from there.
So organic farming was introduced in the 1940s, and the idea of it was to basically use animal manure, cover crops, crop rotation, and biologically based pest controls, resulting in a better farming system.
So basically for their manure, we've got to mention this for the monocropping. We've got to mention for monocropping, but they basically, for their fertilizer, they use a synthetic-based fertilizer. So as it implies, it's very it's all chemical based. Shall I explain a bit more?
So the natural minerals and compounds that fertilizer contains to help soil thrive is basically, one of them is nitrogen and some other chemical elements. This normally happens naturally, but in monocropping, for the synthetic one, they basically just get all these chemical minerals and spray them. So nothing happens naturally. It all just humans.
It's all made.
We'll show you a clip now of synthetic fertilizers being placed.
So, but with organic farming, what they use is basically animal manure, which is a very good fertilizer, and how they basically did it for thousands of years.
They also have fertilizer mixes that are natural, but a common one is animal manure.
Yeah, so animal manure basically contains all these things like hydrogen, and that's what they use to basically,
and compost.
Yeah, that's what they use for their compost, basically.
Animal manure.
That's what they use. Now we're going to talk about the things they spray, which is the pesticides, and this is basically just to get like pests and things like that want to try eat the crops, basically to stay away from them. So they, as we told before, they spray the crops so animals don't go near it.
Yeah, so the pesticides for the monocropping is all chemically based. They spray all these things that animals don't like to basically shoo them off. But in organic farming, they use something called biological pest control. And how that works is basically, say there's a ladybug eating one of the crops, right? They'll get the ladybug's most known predator, or even sometimes they would in the lab they would make the perfect predator. Say it's a really mass production farm, and they have that is needed. They would literally make their own insect or predator to the insect to basically kill them off.
Yeah, so it's it's not using any chemicals, but it's very unnatural, and
it's humanly managed.
Yeah, and this causes many effects on the food itself. And another very important thing that separates organic farming as well as monocropping from regenerative farming is there's no biodiversity. Like in monocropping, there's no biodiversity. As you can see with the photo, it's just the same type of crop. I'm pretty sure it's lettuce, just in rows and rows, and this can happen for like acres upon acres. Basically, they just grow one type of crop, and that means there's no biodiversity. This basically contributes to the health of the soil as well as the, just how nutritious the food is, because when it's biodiverse, first of all, like we said earlier, it goes much faster and more grows, and it's much healthier because that's how they would in a natural ecosystem.
We'll go into biodiversity a bit more.
So we talked about in monocropping how basically it's not very sustainable, as because we're spraying all these chemicals into the soil. Eventually, we just won't be able to do any sort of farming in the future.
It's basically just killing the soil slowly.
Now, this isn't necessarily it's still sustainable as you can farm because it's not going to destroy the soil, but it's not necessarily giving the soil, it's not making the soil as healthy as it can be, which results in the fruit not being as nutritious. So, it's probably similar nutritional level to the ones where they farm it using monocropping, but it's more natural because they're not using any sort of chemicals, and they're using the soil gets all the nutrients from the animal manure and all the other things they use, and it basically goes into the plant or the crop that's grown, and it makes it more nutritious, but still not close to as nutritious as the ones we're going to talk about later.
So after seeing this segment of the video, you may be thinking, well, so I can't have organic food. Are they always bad? No, always. If you get it from a small local farm and stuff like that, I definitely think they'll be better because they have a lot of biodiversity in those farms. But the ones we've been talking about here are for mass production, as you can see in the photo, basically just one thing. That's why those small farms, they refer to them as organic biodiverse farms. But when we talk about the regenerative farm, it takes it to a whole new level.
Yeah, and not saying organic just like this way of organic, because obviously there's no chemicals, so it's not like any chemicals, so you're not eating anything Poison. That could be harmful. You're just not going to be as healthy, and it loses most of its nutritional value because it's going in this way. And everyone says that the nutritional value basically comes from the soil and not just the plant itself, and it's the soil it's grown in, and basically just how the environment around it is as well.
On to the next thing,
and this is when we're going to be talking about regenerative farming, which is the main topic of this video.
So regenerative farming, as we said earlier in this video, there was a documentary that really sprouted our curiosity. And just before we go and talk about this topic by ourselves, we just want to show you a trailer so you can get of this documentary, so you can get an idea
and also
of how biodiversity and regenerative farming looks like.
Yeah, because it's hard to find a lot of photos, so this will give you just a quick introduction so you can follow, you understand more what we're talking about and you're not confused. So this will give you a picture in your head. So we're just gonna play it for you. Also, you can rent this on many platforms.
If you have Stan and Netflix, you can have it there. You can rent it off YouTube and off Amazon store and
for cheap,
yeah, and a lot of other stores.
So if you're interested in that, definitely watch it. It's a very interesting and cool documentary. So we're just gonna play the video. It's only around 3.5 minutes, so enjoy.
This all started with a promise that we'd leave the big city and build a life in perfect harmony with nature, like a traditional farm from the past.
Here we are, Apricot Lane Farms.
Molly and John are very happy about this. What do you think of this, Todd?
This is what we're fighting.
Our version of a farm would be different. Plants, wildlife, livestock, all working together. Here they are, Emma the pig and Mr. Greasy the rooster, friends for life. We wanted to believe that everything had a purpose. We had our plan. And nature had hers.
This feels overwhelming.
But even the pests have a role to play. And these are the opportunities that fuel our farm. They told us we were crazy. And sometimes they were right.
Breaking news in California, 6 major wildfires.
I can see a lot of smoke.
We're starting to face new problems.
We'll knock that fever down and then just pray.
We just don't have answers for it.
No. I hung my heart out to dry.
Our land reawakened.
On roof.
This is a large chicken egg.
Bring it on home. Bring it on home.
We saw things that we had never seen before.
Bring it on home. Bring it on home. Bring it on home.
Have you washed your hands, John?
The hardships we face make the dream itself feel so much more alive.
John, please be careful.
Okay, so that was the trailer. So very interesting, very cool. So as you saw, there were a married couple and they wanted to change their life path and become farmers.
And before they started, they had no experience with farming, and they didn't really know what they were doing. So it's definitely a big change for them.
I believe how they basically afforded the farm because they couldn't afford it is they made a community fundraiser and they raised enough money and they got all this expert help. And basically when they got the farm, no one really believed in them because the soil there and basically the farm itself was in a really bad condition. The soil was all dead and just very hard to basically regenerate.
And also this farming technique, it's not popular at all. And I saw an interview with them, and I'm pretty sure they said that there's only, or what they know of in their state, California, or maybe like 50 farms that do this, if that. So it's a very uncommon way of doing it, and the surrounding farms basically didn't believe them, and they thought that what they're doing was crazy, especially with what they had to work with at the beginning. It's very hard to build a regenerative farm where basically it relies a lot on the soil and the ecosystem around it.
They had rock hard soil there. But
pretty much there.
Regenerative farming is the traditional way of farming. When agriculture was first introduced, this is how they did it. Because they didn't have all these big cities when this was first introduced.
And big machines and like artificial
things.
It
was just basically you're farming yourself for your own food.
Or community,
Yeah, or community.
Yeah.
And they in the actual documentary, they talk about a lot of things. But let me just say, in this regenerative farm is really taking it to the extreme. A lot of regenerative farm, like say you search up regenerative farming on YouTube, you might find some farmers. They just basically talk about organic, everything good, community, but it's really not that extreme. They still have all these systems in place, and they obviously have systems, but this is take it to extreme. It's much more natural. If you want to find out how people normally use regenerative farming, it is not as extreme, but you can search up on YouTube.
Also, the reason for this is because they basically weren't doing it to make a huge, massive organization and just grow, one thing. They just wanted to have the lifestyle, and make money so they can, stay there by just selling a few of their products that they made in the farm. So they weren't trying to do it on such a massive scale, which, this way of farming may not be the best at. But when you talk about basically how it can just literally be anywhere because it works with the ecosystem, they can just be a community type of thing, which is what they do. They basically sell in their community. Also, you saw in the trailer, they say basically they're going to have all these animals, all these plants, and this is biodiversity. It's very important to have biodiversity.
Yeah, a variety of different living organisms.
Yeah, and they didn't really know why, but they just knew a farm has animals. And
they had some help from this guy named Alan.
They say in the documentary.
They say in the documentary, if you watch it, you'll find out who he is. And he's very knowledgeable, and he says there needs to be animals, there needs to be this, there needs to be biodiversity. He didn't tell them why, but he just said it needs to be like that.
And the thing is, there's all these, annoying things, like all these weird plants that are just in the way, and all these animals, that seem to be like bothering, like eating the crops or, killing the animals.
Yeah, killing the chickens.
That help, to do like fertilize or whatever, something like that. But in this farm, they found out basically in the documentary, in their 8-year process of making this and becoming farmers, that nothing was left out. Everything had a purpose, and it was like it just all like flowed together. That's why it took them so long, though, to get everything working correctly.
So you may be thinking, so this just all happened naturally? Everyone, all the animals, all the insects, all the plants just started helping out each other? No. So a lot of problems came along, and that's how they figured it out. Like, for example, in the film / documentary, they had snails. Snails were going all over some of the crops and eating them because they like.
That's what snails do. They're eating the plant.
Yeah.
What they're actually doing, they're eating the leaves, and that's basically where the plants absorb all the water, which basically goes into the soil and affects literally the whole farm. But basically, they had problems there. But then
then they had ducks there, and they basically released the ducks. They would eat the snails, and it'll be good.
They would actually poo in the plants, and that would act as fertilizer as well. That's just a great example.
Yeah, another example is they had these some sort of marsupials. I'm not sure exactly what they called, some sort of rodents, and they thought maybe moles, and they were basically coming out and they were eating the roots. Though it was good because they were eating some dead roots, but they started eating all the roots, and basically everything started dying
because there were so many of them.
So for those, I believe they got like hawks or something, and they started coming in themselves. And there's also another thing to do with the coyotes. Basically, they broke them up in cages, so they wouldn't go for the chickens. They would go for some other pests. They would go for some rabbits that were eating all the crops and stuff like that.
Yeah, but we don't want to give away too much of the film itself, so definitely watch that yourself if you're interested in this topic.
But that's why biodiversity is so important. Different problems come along. Sometimes you want natural solutions, and that's why having different animals and a biodiverse ecosystem is so helpful, because the problems basically resolve themselves. Yes, it does need some human interaction or some human
to get it right and all working.
Yeah, or guidance, human guidance.
Yeah,
but that's what some people believe humans are here for, to guide the world. Basically, that's how it is in this case of farming.
And the animals also help with they actually, like pigs. They naturally like move things to make mud, and these things help with a variety of things. And also the cows, they are basically, they eat grass all day,
and sheep too.
Yeah, but basically what happens actually when, say, a cow eats the grass, basically what it does, apparently the grass itself, the roots, basically has this response when it realizes it's getting pulled out, and they go deeper. So all this like eating, growing back, is very good. That's why, they burn off dead things and they grow back better.
Yeah,
it's that sort of thing.
They help and that's why it's called regenerative, because they kill this grows back. In plants, say someone eats something, eats a plant, they're eating too much of it. Their manure helps as fertilizer, and it helps grow more plants. So it's like the circle of life.
It becomes like a fly cycle. It's like a whole big cycle. Now, we want to talk about soil now, because soil is actually a very important part of this. And without a good soil, this basically won't work. So that's what we're going to talk about now.
In regenerative farming, the soil is the building block element of the regenerative system to work. So, like, regenerative farming techniques suggest to have natural fertilizers, like in organic farming, such as animal manure, for extra nutrients in the soil. So in the soil, there are micronutrients, and micronutrients are very important for a healthy soil and to help plants grow.
If the soil basically is made up of as much organic matter possible, that's how your that's what you want in your soil to be healthy, have as much microorganisms.
Yeah, so microorganisms are so important because they help with getting things like nitrogen in the soil, which basically works as protein for the plants, and basically without it they can't grow.
Also, we haven't really talked about this, but the plants are great because they need a lot of plants on these type of farms because they absorb a lot of water, which basically helps all the other crops grow.
So nitrogen, as I said, is very important, and plants, it goes through the soil and goes to the plants, but it can't just go straight to the plants. Nitrogen is in the air. 78% of our air is nitrogen, I believe, and plants can't actually absorb nitrogen in the air. So how it works is the microorganisms, they basically absorb it, and they basically, when they die or just when they're even in there, they basically help the soil absorb it, and this is through a process called the nitrogen cycle. So, and basically how it works is there's, say, in manure, when an animal dies or animal poops, manure, basically in the animal's manure or in its dead body, it has microbes, and those microbes have nitrogen in them. And when they go in the soil, basically the worms eat it. They poo them out, and that basically
back.
That's why they say microbes or
Microscopic organisms.
Yeah, microorganisms play a huge role because they basically deliver the nutrients that soil and plants need to survive, which is mainly nitrogen.
Now, sometimes all these manure isn't enough. So basically, what they did, I'm pretty sure their name was Molly and John. Basically, what they did, they came up with their own sort of system. And with this type of farming, since it's not popular, basically everyone does it a bit differently. And I saw a podcast with them, and they were basically saying how we were just taking parts of everybody's farm, trying to make it the best it could possibly be. So they basically came up with this sort of like machine, but basically they got these worms, because worms eat whatever's in the ground. But basically they were pumping microorganisms into the ground, making the soil super rich. But again, the plants can't absorb it just like that. So then the worms that they put into the ground ate them. Their droppings were full of nitrogen, and then the plants absorb this, and that's how it works. And then, like we said again, the animals eat the grass, or the plants that then have all these nutrient dense things in them, and then it goes back into the ground. That's why it's so amazing, and that's how this whole ecosystem runs. Everything goes back. Nothing gets wasted. The soil is what turns death back into life, pretty much.
Yeah, this is a very sustainable method, opposed to monocropping and even organic farming, because the soil it's always getting replenished, with all the dead animals, and just revivals of all these revivalries of, I hope that's the word, of replenishing everything
of the ecosystem.
Yeah, with all these microbes.
And it's not only just
everything.
Maintaining the land. Each year after year, it gets healthier because the roots get longer. The soil gets richer over time. That's why it took these guys such a long time. First of all, like we said, they started with horrible soils, dirt. It was very hard just to grow anything.
They said it couldn't be fixed, but it got fixed.
So yeah, that's for soil. So we've told you a lot about regenerative farming, and it's a lot better than the other solutions. Firstly, it's much more nutritious to food because of all these processes they take, and the nutrition of the food actually relies mainly on the soil and not basically just how the lack of chemicals, or how the outside looks. That's why her name's Molly. She said that's why she actually really liked farming, because she had nutrition problems, and she ended up finding out that the deeper reason of why some foods aren't as nutritious, or why she was lacking nutrition, is because of the soil, and that's basically what started their journey. So the soil is basically the building blocks of life. It's the most important part. So that's why with all this monocropping, people would take into consideration. They say, oh well, there's fruit growing. Fruit's fruit.
Healthy.
Like a banana's healthy. Apples are healthy. But really it's just on the soil health, and the things become much healthier. And it's also with animal products like milk and eggs, because there's obviously a lot of problems with the way we farm our meats, like with these pigs, they're shoulder to shoulder, these massive animals all day, in a big
facility,
with not much sunlight, and it's horrible for the animals. And basically we're eating that life, so we're basically eating
bad energy,
bad energy. And the thing is, with the eggs, they basically have I remember they said they have 4 times more vitamin A and all these other improvements just because their chickens they were healthy. They're like eating all these worms that basically eat all these nutrients, and they was running around, and all these things add up basically.
And so now, to basically start concluding this topic, you may be thinking to yourself right now, so regenerative farming sounds great, and it would be great if everyone did regenerative farming, but you may be thinking, but don't they do things like monocropping and these the industrial world of farming to basically get the food out to everyone? Well, it's much easier to get it out to everyone with this sort of farming technique. I think
there has to be a certain amount of people doing it, because right now it's a very unpopular way of farming.
Yeah, it's very unpopular. And basically how it would work is you'd have to go to like small farmers markets and things like that. Unless you can be in the supermarkets, but most people go to supermarkets, but they have them in farmers markets, and you can order them online. Isn't it something like 80%?
Yeah, 80%
from small farms.
Yeah.
Not necessarily regenerative farms, but small farms.
Yeah, and the thing is, most food in the supermarket are from these big companies, and really most of the food is actually coming from these type of farms, smaller type of farms, more local farms. And the reason we haven't maybe caught on to this is because, first of all, it might be expensive to get going, and we've already got all this established.
But it is actually much more sustainable and much cheaper.
It's much more. It's
when
way
things
better
work
for
together, you basically don't need to buy food for the animals, because as you say, like the chickens don't need chicken feed anymore or whatever. They found they could eat the worms that were eating everything.
The snails,
or the ducks could eat the snails, and basically it was just like a perfect living environment.
Yeah, it's all about the ecosystem and getting everything to work together. And as you know, this took a very long time for them to accomplish. And maybe that's why so many people just stick to their old roots. But the thing is, with this, people might be forced to go into this in the future because, as we said, monocropping and all these other farming techniques that we commonly use these days, soon just won't be.
They're not sustainable.
We won't be able to do it, and the land just going to be dead. And this is obviously very bad. And they act like there's some sort of food crisis, so we need to, grow on such a massive scale. But there isn't. The whole point of this regeneration farming technique is that basically everything comes back into life. It's like with water. There's always the same amount of water. From, like, for example, 500 million years ago, there would have been the same amount of water as there is to this very day. It works the same with food. We just may not be able to see it like water because, it goes into the ground, but that's how it works. The circle of life, that's how everything works. Yeah. So I think that's got to conclude it.
We've been waffling a lot in this video, but hopefully it gets out easy to understand and things like that.
Yep, so definitely go research, definitely go watch this film. It's very interesting, and they give more information.
For us to get started, we might just start planting things in our backyard, maybe just for seeds, maybe not even buying things, because now it's COVID lockdown for us, so buying things is more difficult in non-essential stores. But if you have a fruit, maybe it'll take a while, but you can just get their seeds and plant them, search up how to do it. We're going to start. If we've done it on camera, we'll show it, but if not, we'll just let you know in a future video.
So yeah, hopefully you found this video insightful. Hopefully you learned a bit. Maybe if you're thinking about farming and you don't know how you're going to do it, this is definitely a very great way to do it, and definitely the way of the future. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Make sure you watch that documentary if you can.
Check out our other videos, and
thank you for watching, and see you next video.
See ya.